Thank you for joining us for episode 11 of Hawthorne Valley's 50th anniversary podcast, Roots to Renewal. I'm Heather Gibbons, Hawthorne Valley's Director of Marketing and Communications. We started Roots to Renewal to share Hawthorne Valley's story and engage in conversation with friends from around the world who dedicate their lives to meeting the ecological, social, and spiritual needs of our time. We are thankful to Tierra Farm, a family-owned, environmentally conscious manufacturer and distributor of organic dried fruits and nuts, for their generous support. Without it, this podcast would not be possible. Learn more at tierrafarm.org. Recently, our executive director and podcast host, Martin Ping, sat down with Melissa Maur, an artist, musician, photographer, and writer, probably best known in musical circles for her turn as the bass player for the band Hole from 1994 to 1999. Melissa is revered locally as a social entrepreneur. She's the co-founder and director of Basilica Hudson, a nonprofit multidisciplinary art center in Hudson, New York. We consider Basilica to be a sister organization to Hawthorne Valley. Not only are we neighbors geographically, our missions are very much aligned when it comes to supporting the arts and addressing the important environmental and social issues of our times, and we are grateful that Melissa said yes to sitting down with us. Hers is an intriguing biography, and it was a fun and wide-ranging conversation as she and Martin touched on everything from Melissa's musical career to the origin story of Basilica Hudson, to the impact of gentrification on the city of Hudson and its surrounding communities, to the role the city of Montreal played in her formative years. Coincidentally, Melissa also happens to be celebrating her 50th trip around the sun this year.
Good afternoon, Melissa. It is so nice that you were able to join us for our 50th anniversary podcast. It's a milestone, 50 years. Frankie Maur on at the beginning of the podcast. She wrote Diet for a Small Planet 50 years ago. Dana Meadows and company wrote Limits to Growth 50 years ago. Gregory Bateson wrote his seminal book on systems thinking 50 years ago. So good stuff was coming into the world 50 years ago, including you. And I'm so glad that you're here and thankful that Basilica is here in the county. And I'm still kind of stuck in Basilica on their 10th anniversary because that's sort of where we froze in time and then COVID happened. But you're now into your 12th year, correct?
I guess 2022 is our 12th year. Yeah, 2020 was our big milestone of a decade, and we did have a exciting season planned, and then it got frozen in April. We're using the world shift to our creative benefit. We are realizing there is no time to waste on so many of these matters. We already knew that very good work had to be done for people and planet, but it's only the stakes are higher. I feel like a lot of people have woken up from a bit of a denial, dead sleep, that systems are not working as they should, and that there's so much lacking, especially in, with all due respect to where I am standing, the United States of America. As a Canadian, I do always have an outsider eye on a lot of the systems. And I know you and I have spoken about this before on our little walks through fields, but I do feel like 2020 really was a wake-up call for the United States. And it was not only COVID, and it was not only the presidency, it was it was Black Lives Matters. It was everything that's sort of like the dirty that came up and exploded. And it's a vulnerable time for this country, I believe. It's very, very strange. And we're very lucky, as you know better than anyone, because you live, breathe, and watch children grow in one utopia in Columbia County. We're very lucky to be in the Hudson Valley. We know that.
Well, I agree. I often say, if not here, then where? And if not us, then who? And I'm just curious, what inspired you to purchase that building in the first place? And what was the vision you were carrying then?
Well, the world was very different in 2010 when my partner in life in Basilica, Tony Stone, and I acquired this 1880s factory with no electricity, no plumbing, which was at the time owned by a Steiner enthusiast and connoisseur, Patrick Doyle, who had envisioned it when he took it on in the year 2000 as a frozen in time glue factory. He saw the potential for the community center. He had business plans, he had plumbing plans. He was a visionary in that way. And he had begun to activate it. Most known activation he did was when the City of Hudson citizens group were fighting the St. Lawrence cement plant. Patti Smith played at the Basilica in those very early years that Patrick owned it to pay the legal bills to protect the waterfront. So she essentially, in terms of her origin story, that's the first real reclaiming, and it's an environmental act to protect the waterfront and the air and the people of the city of Hudson. And it was the largest citizen campaign against a Swiss cement plant that I think their campaign was $67 million to try to get this plant made. And a small group of citizens stopped it. So that was one of the first things I understood in the view outside my window when I looked at this beautiful architectural feat with the Catskill Mountains and the river behind it. And I, right away, what is that building? And someone said, oh, this eccentric guy, Patrick, owns it. And Patti Smith played there and they fought the cement plant. I mean, there's no more poetry than you need to fall in love with a building than that. And when we met Patrick Doyle, because I quickly said, we should bring music there. We should bring film there. Tony's a filmmaker. I'm a musician. And we met Patrick and said, what do you do there? We'd love to collaborate and start maybe bringing some of our community. So we met Patrick and he gave us a tour. And when I brought him to my top balcony from my house and I said, look at the view of this place, he looked at me and this, I literally remember fairy dust twinkling down from the sun, said, Melissa, this is your oracle. And next thing I know, a year later, within the year, he made Tony and I an offer we couldn't refuse, which is that it was our time to take it on. He was completing his 10-year milestone. He'd had it from 2010, and he told us it was time for us to take it over and he would hold the mortgage. And there was no needing to find a bank. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity where somebody asked us, we certainly did not come to upstate New York looking for a giant factory. We came looking for more time and space to be creative people and to maybe have a baby and a cat and, have a next chapter in life. It's been nonstop since we launched it. We have a wedding business on the side. We're like, oh, we'll have that to pay for the bills. And then we'll have our cool alternative music and art people that won't make any money, but it doesn't matter. We'll have the wedding. And that back of the napkin plan has worked out and just in many ways grown faster than we can handle. Alternative culture in major cities is not doing well, even worse post-COVID. The corporate takeover is alive and well. And I, who am a counterculture, alternative subculture, born and raised enthusiast, you can't do that in major cities unless you live in, Scandinavia or Canada, where the government protects spaces for that. It was easier for us at first to get people from the city to take a train up or drive up to see an experimental art festival than it was for locals. And so somewhere halfway point, a few years in, I started Basilica Farm and Flea, which was when I discovered as a socialist Canadian that Black Friday or whatever this crazy big box sale thing exists, and that people were not supporting local makers on this crazy, buy everything day. So I started Farm and Flea as just a kind of socialist reaction to my corporate America environment. And that was such a success so quickly. And by the third year, I think we had 15,000 people in one weekend. The population of Hudson is 7,000 people. So I see Farm and Flea as how I evolved with living in the region, allowing the region to inform the program. But when I came, I was bringing my own dreams, which was my heart and soul 24-hour drone experiments in sound and music, which is a 24-hour immersive experiential listening concert where it's 24 hours laying on the ground, meditating essentially with abstract sound at the center. When we started in 2010, I was A, a world traveler, and B, hadn't done academics on urban development. I had no idea that, in fact, our contribution, bringing alternative culture, artisan marketplaces, would be part of that complicated evolution. So the world has become much more nuanced for me living in New York, living in upstate New York versus a major city, because I've always been a deep believer as a musician who was saved by music in school and gave me a direction and a deep connection to my spirit self and to the universe. I always think arts are magic and have the power to heal. I don't think of the world in economic development, which is what has been, for me, the biggest change being a brick and mortar owner. The responsibility one has when you have space, business, all of a sudden that utopia, kind of innocent world of an artist that I occupied before was rudely awakened. In terms of how much more complicated it is to put yourself out there in the world. It's really been taking our role more seriously and when turning 10, and then just seeing the kind of rapid needs in the environment, not just locally, but on the planet, both in social and in ecological ways. So I guess the loss of innocence has occurred, and that's okay.
When you said earlier about buying this building and your love of respecting and preserving historical buildings and putting them in service to the future, it reminds me of our dear friend and Hawthorne Valley board member Herbert Dreisaitl. He would see that right away, and places that other people might look at and say, oh my God, that's so old and falling down and decrepit, or it's embarrassing because it's representative of our industrial youth. We didn't know any better and we're playing with matches. And Herbert would say, no, this is all a part of our story and we just need to put it into our new story. And he would change buildings in the Ruhr Valley of Germany and turn them into museums and interactive places for children. And he was in that building and really saw what you've now managed to accomplish. What he would say, we have to make spaces that say to especially young people, we love you. You are welcome here. I think that's a great design principle to start with.
Yeah, and connecting the infrastructure with the heart, like we said earlier, it's like the combination of taking responsibility for your material presence, as well as deep mindful care in how you gather humans and souls, and that's obviously why the arts is so essential to us. Is that it's the connection to the heart, and it's a way of hearing a story a more emotional way than it, say, the academic. The building has represented that balance between real deal physical infrastructure and conceptual emotional heart. And then, of course, becoming parents and our legacy that we're leaving for our daughter, but of course, all children, becomes much more acute as you enter these kinds of phases and as the world enters this kind of place. And so I guess we felt incredibly fortunate as like I said, Tony, a filmmaker, and me, a musician, without realizing it, by manifesting a physical reality, which is this building and a gathering place. And not, music and film is very kind of esoteric. Music you literally can't even hold. You can watch and hear it. Film is that dark immersive thing with the cinema, at least the way Tony likes it, old fashioned, go to the movies, share it with a dark audience. But it's really different when you have a physical being, like I think of basilica as being this entity that is just this thing that is part of our family, like our cat, it's this strange living, growing thing. And I do think, because Tony grew up in Lower Manhattan and I grew up in Montreal, like Herbert, who I've met along throughout the years because he'd come through the waterfront, we knew how to imagine these buildings being places of magical people and gathering. Like that's what great cities in Europe and the greats do. There's like a lot of creative mind and government grants. And I will say, in terms of the state of New York and any complaints one should have about the United States government and what it does and does not offer its people, the state of New York is making this possible. NYSERDA, the energy council of New York State, is paying for half of this giant net zero campus because they recognize specifically that our reclaiming of the historic building on the waterfront with the social component, this is the model they want to support. So that's, in terms of advocacy, I am on the New York State Economic Development Council specifically for green advocacy, to be able to meet people like me before I knew about the grants, to say there are grants to pay for this. So it's been, that's also how it changed a lot for me. Prior to that, I was, communing with my fellow alternative artists and trying to create music festivals. And when we had our net zero groundbreaking in the fall, and we had John Bowermaster, the environmental filmmaker, right? He's made a mini documentary we're launching tomorrow. So for the podcast, you can share that link. But he did a little mini documentary on our groundbreaking. And there it was, blustery November with our elected officials and the New York State Energy Council folks. It was a turning point for me in realizing how lovely, as significant that gathering was for me as any of my momentous magical music events I've ever had. That the shift into making an infrastructure difference and working with the people on a science, infrastructure, and finance side of things was as deeply rewarding and soulfully connected as anything I've ever done in music and art. And that was a very important turning point for me as a grown-up.
You as a grown-up makes me want to ask you about you as a child. You mentioned River's 10th birthday, and I'm, two things, and also you as a musician. I'm just really curious on your thoughts or reflections on how your early years in growing up in Montreal has influenced your current outlook on life. And then I would and I'd love to hear that. And then afterwards, I'm going to make sure I also ask you about, reflecting on your career as a
well,
artist.
It's good timing because I'm writing my memoir right now. I'm a year into writing my memoir, and I just this morning submitted my first ever Canadian Council government grant. And only Canadians, no matter where they live, can apply for a living wage grant to be able to put together a project, whether it's a book, a play, a album that represents their mission, which essentially is to get Canadian stories out there. And so I assured in this grant submission that my story is a Montreal story in a very, very significant way, and that reflecting on my roots at that time and culture and my parents it has worked for me. I am not someone who had to pull away from, I was born into the right place in the right family, put it that way, in terms of it fit, and I embraced it, and I grew from it, and I evolved from both of my parents. And in many ways, I had to leave Montreal because their commitment to Montreal was both so passionate and deep. And I grew up in the shadow of these committed cultural leaders. And in many ways, when I got my first ticket out, I recognized, I'm never going to be as cool as my parents in this town. So I might as well just go find my own place on the globe. So I really, really look up to my parents. My father, tomorrow, it is the 24th anniversary of his death. So he's been gone for almost half my life. But his 54 years of life was as big as many multiple people with hundreds of years. The man burned so bright and devoted his life to the city of Montreal. I grew up, both my parents were broadcasters. They met at CBC when they were working. They both covered the cultural world of their time deeply and passionately. They were both English speaking. My mother, an expat from Boston, who moved to do her master's in French literature at McGill. And my father was born to Swiss immigrants, first generation Montrealer. And they were in love with Montreal in the 60s and 70s. And at the time, there's tumultuous, for those who don't know Canadian politics, it was called the Language Wars, which was basically the French reclaiming their power in their territory. The English had wiped out the French language in Canada, and Quebec, which had been founded by the French hundreds of years ago, were having a giant social upheaval. And my parents, both English speakers, took the side of the French and fought with them. My father was in jail. My mother was covering it for the newspapers, and they were really active in their cultural revolution then, but also everything you want bohemian, culturally active parents to be at that time. So I was raised in an incredibly colorful environment, but beyond them, that city is still one of the greatest international cities. I am just so lucky to have been born and raised in the the immigrant neighborhood, which is now, still put it this way, in 1975, I'd be walking around the corner to the Polish deli, the Jewish bakery. The neighborhood was the foundation of all the immigrants from the turn of the century, lots of Russian, Ukrainian. Every single one of those shops is still there. And I am not joking. That neighborhood has not changed since I grew up there. And those were 2-generation family shops. So that Montreal was the world that, was the North America history on my block, and it never has changed. And it made me everything I am. And I went to an art school, an experimental art school. My mother put me in the second year of its incarnation called FACE, Fine Arts Core Education, where they believe that if you put arts first, the children would thrive. I loved school my whole life because arts were first, and I never doubted. And I even got an opportunity to join the weird, kooky high school side, which was called Mind, Moving in New Directions, for the wild artists who are like, actually, I want to do a citizen individual led super duper program of my own for high school. So my program was build a dark room in a janitor's closet and become a photographer, and supported to do that by my public school. I am incredibly fortunate. I grew up in an amazing city in an amazing time. My parents both went on to do incredible things. My father, through his journalism, both radio, TV, started as a college dropout copy boy at the Montreal Gazette, wrote a 3-day-a-week column until the day he died. So he was a big voice of Montreal, writing about everything he believed in, the people. He was friends with the inmates, the nuns, the drug dealers, the bar owners. He was the man of the people. Everyone could approach him for help. And he, through that, became the city councilor for downtown Montreal on and off for 15 years. So he ran downtown because he was a man of the people. And I was raised on the campaign trail, going door to door. And I'll never forget asking him, because the election nights, I'd always panic. What if he loses? I'll be so upset. He'll be so upset. He worked so hard. He always seemed so fearless. Didn't matter. He would lose sometime until he found his city hold, his downtown city hold. Once he got that, he won year after year. But when I was getting nervous one night and I asked him, "Why do you do this?" he said, "Because I don't trust those assholes to do it. Someone's got to get in there." So he was the best. he was an independent fighter till the end. And he founded every party he ran in. And everyone would say, "But Nick, you change parties so much." He said, "I don't change parties. They change. I stay the same." And he would found a new citizens movement, a new independent Democrat movement, because he never compromised. And then that's how he died, uncompromised, at 54. Tomorrow is the anniversary. And there's an amazing book of his journalism that came out after he died. I can get you a copy one day if you want, Martin, because it's a timeless story of a man who just fought for what he believes in, and a colorful city. The book is called A Montreal Life. And then my mother, oh my God, she always kind of falls into the shadow because he was so big. But she, in her quiet commitment to the Quebec theater, has become the leading French Canadian literary translator, and her commitment to the world is to bring French Canadian theater, to the rest of the globe. So that is her forte, and she has been awarded Governor General Award and Order of Canada, which is the equivalent of the knighting in the Queen's room in Canada in Ottawa, twice. She has committed herself to the French language story in theater, and they've never had a normal boss in their lives. No, but they were both freelancers. They never had a job in a normal way. They were always freelancers. So I'd say that's the biggest influence on me, is the freelance, do it yourself, do it your way. And they never once told me who I was. They just always asked who I was. And that was it. I said, I like a camera because I believe, I'm shy. I don't really like talking. I want to take pictures and hide behind a camera. So my mother bought me at a pawn shop a little crappy camera. So they just listened, and they really supported my development as my own individual. And here I am in Hudson, trying to, I have a very similar relationship to Hudson as my parents did to their cities, but it's a different scale and a different story. But that's my upbringing. And then the rock music, I don't even feel like I'm kind of so right now in my memoir, so deep in the childhood and so here in the 2020s of the world with my daughter turning 10, that in between part of life, the 20s and 30s, it's a time of decadence and exploration. And I was so lucky to get, one-way ticket around the world for over a decade. And I got to see the world through giant American rock bands, and also got to see a very dark side of like I always knew, didn't want anything to do with corporate America and fame. And it was just a disaster in many ways in terms of my generation's going through the darkness of anyone who knows the bands from that time, Nirvana and the band that I was in, his widow, Courtney Love's band Hole, and then later in the Smashing Pumpkins. It was just surrounded by death, addiction, sadness. Really, when I joined the band in the wake of the bass player's death, overdose that I replaced, and the suicide of the singer's husband, I originally said no to joining because it was just a landscape of sadness and pain and powerful music and powerful movement of underground music going to the mainstream, but a lot of notable pain. And I said no. And through that, the band had decided I was the one. Courtney Love decided that's the one I want. That she said no, and she called me. I was like, no, I'm in Montreal studying photography. I've got my own band. I am not interested. And she hounded me and got me on the phone. My roommates would say, she's calling again. And she convinced me to get on a plane, go to Seattle, and tell her to her face I didn't want to be in her band. And when I arrived in Seattle, I was coming down the escalator and I saw Courtney, Patty, the girl drummer, the nanny, and their 2-year-old. Kurt and Courtney had a daughter when Kurt committed suicide, and everyone knew there was this like widowed single mother, Courtney, and this little daughter. And I came down the escalators and I saw the 4 of them standing there, and that was it. I realized it was my destiny, and these women needed me, and the landscape that was male dominated in rock music that time needed me. What I didn't mention, my mother was a fearless feminist, 100%, women are equal to men. You will do and she was the big rock music lover. So she raised me with her record collection, and the rest is history. I saw those women and I saw the need and my opportunity to bring light and change in a way. I was 22 when I joined the band, and it was epic. And it was a lot of sadness, though. There was a lot of, my generation was plagued by a lot of broken children that miraculously made it in rock music, so we know their stories through the screaming and the rage and the music. It's a very unique part of my generation that I'm still trying to figure out, that I'm writing about now. And I am starting to see clearly 25 years later where I think that post-Reagan golden years of the 90s, Clinton, everything progress, where that rage and pain and red flags were coming from in us. I think we felt something coming. And that's been fascinating. And I'm glad I've had that time to think about it, because it was palpable, the pain in my generation. And I'm not saying that there isn't pain everywhere, but it really rose to the top in that mainstream moment of music, and why. So I've been thinking about a lot. So that was my PhD in humanity was that decade. Then I went off and made some solo records, and that was so fun and so easy, and it was just me at the center of it. And I was ready to retire, to have a baby and start an art center, and there I am.
Wow, this will require a whole second episode when we're
The
it's just
1990s
because there's also there's an echo, I mean, clearly, of that sadness, and I don't know how it's able to find its expression now, except that we're seeing tragically way too many people who
Yeah.
are choosing to take their life and or
Mhm.
becoming involved in substances that are, essentially taking their life. And I'm so grateful for the insight that you bring coming out of all that you get to share that now. And I can't
Yeah.
wait till your memoir comes out. It's going to
When
be
I did it, just do kind of, it's sort of because it's starting to kind of merge the memoir into my Basilica work right now, and realizing I was asked to propose an op-ed for Rolling Stone, and I have a draft going right now about the climate catastrophe, but I'm twisting it. I'm reviewing how the alternative culture of my generation could be helpful right now in understanding both the abstract pain and fear, as well as the grassroots integrity movement that we had that moved people. I mean, before we were co-opted by the Coca-Cola corporations, we were motivated. We found each other. We were broken, lost, and found each other across the globe. It was a profound youth movement that was strangely abstract. It was about the heart and music. So I actually been writing can alternative culture save our planet op-ed right now, trying to figure, and obviously the answer is yes, because we're all going to have to do it grassroots. There's no way the corporations and government are going to figure this out. So the answer is yes, but it's like that question of the pre-digitalization. I'm writing a lot about that, about when the arts and lifestyle went from analog, shift from analog to digital. There's still pain and disconnect, and as we know, problems with social developments that are happening with those who were not one foot in the analog world like we are. We have to take a step back. I think it's the humility of understanding what a chaotic world we have ahead of us and in
yeah.
front of us.
We need to go from hubris to humility. We're in many ways
Exactly.
a kind of clever species in manipulating the natural world to our
Yes.
alleged will, but we certainly, the genie's out of the bottle. And just thinking of technology makes me think of Tony's recent film, and
Yes.
which I think is having an area screening this
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah, it's having its area screenings. It came out last month, digital everywhere, so it's Amazon, Apple, everything. He premiered it in Montana, where he filmed it, where Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, had lived in. Part of what's incredible about Ted K, Tony's movie, is that he has been fascinated by Ted K's manifesto, but also his writings and his warnings about technology and the natural world and humans. But Tony decided to make that film in a very subjective way, which is be in the man's subjective perspective of living in a cabin, a 10 by 12-foot cabin in the woods of Montana, which is where he conducted all of his manifesto writing. And so Tony managed to make that film in a very immersive way, where the town of Lincoln, Montana, where Ted Kaczynski lived for 25 years, embraced Tony in the production, and he rebuilt the cabin on the footings of the original cabin. And the actor, who's a method actor, Shartlo Copley from South Africa, incredible actor, became Ted Kaczynski over the course of a year. And they worked with the locals to really be in the skin and in the body of this man who really loved nature more than anything on the planet. That was his refuge, but he also, in a mad scientist as well as mentally ill way, despised the world and where it was going. Anyone who's interested in that dark dance between the rage against society and technology and the raping and pillaging of the earth, and the need to be, a compassionate, loving person who doesn't want to avenge. It's a very complicated story, and it's told in a beautiful way, where you're not told that he is right or he is wrong. He's clearly wrong. He's a mentally ill person, but you're given an opportunity to actually see through the eyes and the pain. And when Tony started making this movie 10 years ago, no one wanted to touch it. The timeliness of this film, just what I was saying at the very beginning, 2020 took the blinders off of a lot of people, I think. And his madness and sickness and foreshadowing is terrifying. And it's very chilling to the bone. The film is entirely made of his writings, his diaries. So you are in the mind and the diaries of this man who basically just wants to stop industrial technology and industrial society and just be at one with nature. Anyone who's listening should sign up to the Basilica mailing list. We're kicking off our season Earth Day weekend, and we will be continuing all season. We're actually focusing on a weekly series. We've always been known for these big giant destination things where people from far and wide come to this big building. And between COVID and this kind of question of what is our local creative community actually like in Hudson right now, not on the weekends, we're going to launching Jupiter Nights, which is Thursday, the day ruled by the planet Jupiter, the planet of expansion. It's going to be a day to expand your mind and learn something. And it's going to be focusing on avant-garde local creators, conversations, poets, artists, and it's going to be the local Thursday nights. So we're excited to launch that on Cinco de Mayo, and we're going to be encouraging people to come down to the Hudson waterfronts on Thursday evenings and see the sunset. It's kind of a new, exciting step for us. But the big destination things are impossible to predict now. We can't plan for thousands of people on a weekend. So we're going local, and it's great.
I love that Jupiter Day. It's a day of expansion. Is absolutely brilliant, and I'm going to show up. Your openness is refreshing. I hope everyone listening can maintain the same level of openness and curiosity and create the space for what wants to emerge. We're all going to participate in that in one way or another, and hopefully in a way that allows us to also celebrate it in some sense.
Yeah. So, I think it starts with a lot of softening. I think you must soften and be flexible. And that will help us at least navigate it. Thank you, Hawthorne Valley, for being fantastic.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay. Being Melissa and fantastic.
Yes, thank you. We'll speak soon.
If you'd like to learn more about Basilica Hudson and check out their upcoming programming, please visit their website, basilicahudson.org. Thanks for listening to Hawthorne Valley's Roots to Renewal podcast. We are an association comprised of a variety of interconnected initiatives that work collectively to meet our mission. You can learn more about our work by visiting our website at hawthornevalley.org. Hawthorne Valley is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on the generosity of people like you to make our work a reality. Please consider making a donation to support us today. If you'd like to help us in other ways, please help spread the word about this podcast by sharing it with your friends and leaving us a rating and review. Special thanks to our sponsor, Tierra Farm, who makes this podcast possible. Thank you to Grammy Award-winning artist Aaron Dessner for providing our soundtrack, and Aaron Ping for his editing expertise.